Good evening. For those who don't know me, I'm Sigrid de Vries. I am the Director General of ACEA, and I want to really extend a very, very warm welcome to all of you for coming to our annual reception, the reception of the European Association of Automobile Manufacturers in Brussels. And it's a real pleasure to see so many friends and partners and ACEA members gathered here today. Bringing together such a huge group and very diverse group from across the automotive ecosystem is really a great reminder of the strength and also the importance of our industry in Europe. I extend also a very special welcome to the members of the European Parliament that are here, the ambassadors and the attachés, Commission officials, and also the CEOs and board members of ACEA members, notably BMW, this is alphabetical order, no preference, BMW, Daimler Truck, MAN, Truck and Bus, Mercedes, Renault, and Stellantis. So very welcome, and please use the opportunity later on to talk to them. And I also welcome especially the heads of the national automotive associations in Europe. Very important partners for us as well. We truly live in unprecedented times, and it's hard to think of a moment when the world was facing more challenges and so many crises also at the same time. The world and the communities that we live in are being tested in multiple ways, from economic to political and also geopolitical, but also in terms of the values and the beliefs that we share. And the auto industry too is tested, grappling with profound transformation, with ever-increasing competition and a new world order in which the trusted business model, and that's operating integrated global supply chains and also optimizing resources through international trade and building vehicles ready for markets across the globe, that business model is being disrupted. And in such reality, such a new reality, it matters more than ever to have a supportive environment at home, a supportive set of rules and policies that help industry thrive, that provides both stability and predictability, but also flexibility and agility to adjust when that is needed. Which is why we are heavily engaging ourselves in making our home base as supportive as possible. And that's also why all these CEOs and board members are here, because it's important that we engage ourselves and that we make the case for industry. Now, here's the three things that we need most. We need a pragmatic trajectory to decarbonization with a 3-lane approach for cars, for vans, and also for trucks, with ambitious targets at the horizon, yet with flexibility and technology neutrality to make it work. Second, we need a robust and coherent industrial strategy, as outlined also in the Draghi report, no reception without mentioning Draghi, remember? With regulatory streamlining that is meaningful and also an international trade policy that supports. And third, we need a strategy for growth and investment so we can reverse the decline in vehicle production here in Europe. We can enable economies of scale and secure jobs, and we can also reverse the trend of ever older vehicles on the roads. So, dear guests, it cannot come much as a surprise that competitiveness starts at home. We've seen that in the run-up to today's Industrial Accelerator Act. But the point I'm trying to make is that ACEA members range from known European brands that have a global footprint as well, to foreign manufacturers with a long-established manufacturing base in Europe. And they all want to do well in Europe. And they're all proud members of society, rooted in communities, and supporting a whopping total of 13 million livelihoods in the making. So competitiveness in essence, and first and foremost, means a coherent industrial policy, many ingredients to create a business case and unlock these economies of scale. And such policy must address crucial barriers like high energy costs, a performant electricity grid, and also sufficient charging infrastructure. It must be intrinsically market-oriented, because we know by now that targets alone do not drive transformation. Markets and customers are needed too. Now, to flesh this out, I'm going to be joined on stage by two industry leaders. Karin Rådström, she's the CEO of Daimler Truck and chair of the ACEA Commercial Vehicle Board. And also Ola Källenius, who is the CEO of Mercedes-Benz and president of the ACEA Board. So please, could I invite you on the stage? Thanks for being here with us tonight. So as I said already, Karin, Ola, these are unprecedented times that require also a bit of original thinking. And to be fair, we've seen some of that in Europe and here in Brussels recently. Nevertheless, and I'll try to be a bit provocative here, have you ever entertained the thought, if Europe were a company, how would I run it? And is that even a useful parallel to draw? Karin, you want to start?
Actually, Gottlieb Daimler invented the truck 130 years ago. And then our company was founded. And of course, over 130 years we've existed. We've been driving innovation, building customer relations, brand, which has taken us to where we are today. And today we're one of the biggest and one of the most successful truck companies in the world. But as a CEO, since that was your question, one of my most important tasks is to make sure that we don't ever take our 130 years of success for granted, because nothing says that we will be successful in the future just because that's where we come from. So in Daimler Truck, we talk a lot about how do we constantly need to stay humble, stay hungry, and what do we need to do different to be sure that we're competitive in the future. And we actually have 3 words that we talk about a lot. We need to get simpler, we need to get faster, and that will make us stronger. So simpler, faster, stronger. And I think if I were the CEO of the EU, I would run a very similar initiative, because I think even coming here quite a lot and having a lot of meetings, I meet too many people who take our democracy and our prosperity in Europe for granted and think that this will remain regardless of how we steer the European Union. And I really believe that if we don't make it simpler, faster, and stronger, we will not have a bright future on this continent.
Thank you. Ola, does that resonate with you?
That absolutely resonates with me. Of course, the EU is not a company, and I'm glad I'm working for a company, because politics seems more complicated than what we do. But I do want to pick up on that strand of thought from Karin. We have been living under a current regulatory hypothesis for the last 5 or 6 years. And I think this time it is really time to take an inventory of what has worked and what hasn't worked. You could say, in terms of competitiveness, that is what the Draghi report was all about. And the report wrote about some inconvenient truths, but also made some very strong suggestions, politically difficult to implement, but strong suggestions. And here we are, now 18 months later. How much of that have we actually done? You don't survive as a truck company for 130 years or as a car company for 140 years. We're celebrating the invention now. If you're not prepared to change your strategy from time to time depending on market conditions. And it feels like, to a degree, we're rigidly holding on to some shared beliefs from 5 or 6 years ago that simply have not materialized. And saying that, I'm not proposing that we should change the destination of travel. We both know, and we're investing billions and billions into that destination. That's a destination of zero emission. That's a destination of intelligent trucks and cars. But we have to make regulatory adjustments to make sure that we don't unintendedly distort the market or make the market smaller. Because then we're going to be economically weaker and we will not be able to fulfill our targets. So everything that we're talking about comes back to that one thing. Are we as Europe prepared to make the necessary pragmatic adjustments to put ourselves on the right course to protect economy and jobs and our innovation strength, decarbonize in a pragmatic way, and build some kind of resilience around supply chains for Europe? That's what the debate is about. So if I were the CEO of Europe, I would focus on all three things, have all three balls in the air, not just on one.
And to stay with that analogy for a moment, so what would be your first decision you would take?
The number one priority is to take the proposal from the 16th of December from the Commission that actually opens the door to technology flexibility and some market flexibility on the CO2 side, and write the regulation around that practically works. When I saw the headline on the 16th, we had a long debate leading into it. I thought to myself, okay, it's actually a big political move to walk away from a deterministic 100% goal and actually open the door for technology flexibility and maybe more flexibility around the timeline. But then I read the fine print. And after I read the fine print and spoke to several colleagues, not just on the OEM side, suppliers, big leasing companies, fleet customers, and so on, and you start reading the fine print and you go, actually what they're writing there, it doesn't work. I'm not saying that it is not well intended, but it doesn't work. So you can only come to the conclusion, you have to fix the mechanics and the math around that regulation. Keep the destination of travel, fix that. That would be my number one. My number two is the regulatory burden as such.
Can I just add to that?
Please.
Because I think what's often forgotten, both on the car and on the truck side, is that we also build a lot of cars and trucks and buses in Europe that we export.
Absolutely.
So when you add regulatory burden in Europe and then you say, well, it's the same for everyone, so it doesn't matter, you actually forget that you make us very uncompetitive in the rest of the world. And a lot of the industry workers in Europe are there because we have such amazing export products. So that's also important to keep in mind, that it's not the European regulation also affects competitiveness much beyond the borders of this continent.
And we want to encourage and applaud regulatory deburdening that is happening with some of the omnibus initiatives. So we should not just sit here and complain. It's not like nothing is happening. Some things are happening. But at the same time, it feels like we don't need one omnibus, we need a whole fleet of omnibuses to be filled up with ideas to improve the competitiveness of Europe. Fix CO2 regulation and increase the competitiveness through smart regulation and in some cases, deregulation.
Yeah. Now, Karin, Ola just talked about what was in the automotive package presented in December for cars and vans. We could talk about that too. But there was a little bit about trucks, but maybe not as much as you would have hoped. So if you look at not just the regulatory streamlining part, but also the decarbonization part, and this package, I think, really tried to address both. Yeah. What were you missing and what would you hope for in the next iteration of this process?
I mean, what was really positive for the truck side was that we got something called targeted amendment, which means if we overachieve our targets between 25 and 2030, we can use that also going forward. But I think the big challenge that we face as an industry is the CO2 targets that we have in 2030, which require us to scale up from the 2025, around 2.5% of the total market was electric, to 2030, when in order to reach our CO2 target, it needs to be 35%. Yeah. Which is obviously a steeper curve than anything you've ever seen in China, just to make one benchmark. And what's missing there is the customers don't necessarily see the cost parity compared to diesel, and there is not sufficient infrastructure in Europe to run trucks. So the system is broken from our perspective.
The vehicles are there, but
the vehicles are there, but the enabling conditions not. And by the way, if we don't fulfill the CO2 targets, the penalties are so big we will have no European truck companies after 2030. Yeah. I mean, it's 130 million per percentage missed. So it's kind of wiping off any kind of profit and, by the way, investments into the future.
But it's that magnitude, right, of the challenge. It's existential for trucks, but also for...
So if I were the CEO of Europe, I would scream a little bit about this to make people start moving. It's not for my pockets and my profits. It's for the people who work in the companies and the suppliers. It's about our common prosperity and being relevant as a continent. But I don't feel the sense of urgency about that.
Do you feel enough sense of urgency?
Well, the one thing nobody in the rooms needs to worry about is our will to go to the ultimate destination. The European auto industry in the last 5 years has invested more than 300 billion euro into decarbonization. And of course, more and more money is going into intelligent mobility as well. And the European auto industry is gearing up to invest another minimum 200 to 300 billion in the next 5 years to get there. So if anybody in the room believes that the discussion is about an if, you can discard that thought right now. In the boardrooms, we have made the decision. Yeah. We're going towards zero emission. We're going towards intelligent, safer mobility. Every big car company is putting tens of billions into this. So in that sense, we're all Catholic now. That is the least of our worries. The thing that we worry about is potential market distortion through deterministic regulations telling the consumer what they are allowed to do at certain points in time. And this is what could lead to minimum a temporary market disruption, but maybe a longer one, and would destroy an enormous amount of economic value where we need all the money in the global competition to invest into new technologies.
Now, change is always hard, right? And you're both running very large companies. You've been transforming businesses before. So what is it that you encountered there and that you could bring also to the table here to break through and to make sure transformation actually works? What is the biggest success factor?
I think one thing is you need a very compelling vision of what a future could look like, because that rallies people in the company, and you know, people want to do something that's meaningful and that leads to a better future. I often talk about that, you know, regardless if I stay 5 years or 10 years in this role, I'm only going to be a small part of this company's great history. And I think of it like I take something and I want to hand something better over. And I think that's something that we need to start thinking about in the EU as well. It's
and
like,
that we could do
first of all, what's going to drive this continent in 10 to 20 years? I don't even know. I don't know where we're going with the EU. So we need to have that common target picture, like who do we want to be? And then we have to start moving backwards to understand what does it take to get there. And then I think you have to take some pretty big, bold and difficult decisions. But if you're convinced about where you want to go, then it's also easier to get people along on the journey, even when it's sometimes difficult decisions.
Very well. I also take that as inspiration and back into the boardroom that we have at ACEA with you and others to help indeed convey that compelling vision for the automotive industry and for Europe. The two are intertwined, I would say. A year from now, Ola, I know you don't want to stay for another year as president, but say you would and you would be on stage again. What would you like to have seen changed most?
You're underestimating how much I am enjoying this night shift job that I have together with you to work on policy. But it is customary that you don't stay in the role for more than 2 years, for sure. What I would like to see is that we do achieve a pragmatic regulatory ultimate proposal on CO2, that we have moved a step on the regulatory side and competitiveness, but there's no doubt that the people in this room want a strong Europe. A strong Europe means an economically strong Europe. A strong Europe means a Europe that returns to growth. A strong Europe means a Europe that can also pay for its own deterrence. But a strong Europe also means a Europe that continues the path towards decarbonization, but in a sensible way. And I would like us be on a path towards a stronger Europe. And if we, in our association work as a thought partner, a dialogue partner for policymakers, can contribute to that, then all the work that we're doing in the association has been worthwhile.